America is pounded by the biggest wave of terrorist attacks ever seen. It's time for Britain to leave the European Union. Every part of the United Kingdom is now in lockdown.
The BBC's Huw Edwards was taken off the air over claims that he paid a teenager for sexually explicit photos.
Former BBC News presenter Huw Edwards has pleaded guilty at Westminster Magistrates Court to 3 counts of making indecent images of children.
He has been given a suspended 6-month sentence for child abuse image offences, meaning that he does avoid going to prison.
Huw Edwards described the 41 photos and videos of children being SCHOOLBOYS abused that he accessed and viewed between December 2020 and August 2021 as, quote, amazing, unquote. The former BBC star, a man with a wife, 3 sons and 2 daughters, ordered such images meaning both photos and videos, because, as in the case of all other online you-know-whatter files, they depicted things that he himself wanted to do to children but didn't dare. And yet, when Edwards came to court to answer 3 counts of, quote, making indecent images of children, unquote, the judge accepted his claims that A, due to a neurological disorder from which he suffers, he had no recollection of seeing any such images, and that B, for the same reason, he could not have derived any sexual pleasure from such images anyway. I'll come back to Edwards' convictions for accessing and viewing child SEX abuse images shortly. Not wanting to have this video age restricted is why I'm disguising certain words.
Today, the man who brought us the news for so many years was the news.
He seemed to stare defiantly at the cameras and reporters. Some of them were his colleagues not so long ago.
Shortly after Edwards' suspension from his duties at the BBC, which took place on the 6th of July 2023, a young man came forward to report that Edwards had threatened him at one point never to tell anyone about the online flirting that Edwards had been doing with him, the two having met on a dating app. The young man affirmed that Edwards' threats worked. They left him too scared to act. In February 2021, in violation of lockdown rules, Edwards went out to meet, at a London flat, a young man to whom he had sent money and from whom he had received a semi-naked photo. Edwards himself was one of the people on TV who had announced the national lockdown along with its rules to the whole of the UK. Another young man, now aged 22, has reported that receiving messages with love heart emojis and kisses from Edwards, such as he did via Instagram in 2018, now feels creepy to him, given that he was still at school at the time. Coming on to boys and young men via social media and then offering them money for explicit pictures, this was Edwards' modus operandi in his career as an online sex predator. The 2 most significant examples of this behaviour from Edwards are coming up. Before meeting in January 2022 with a 27-year-old companion of his at the Ivy, an exclusive restaurant and members club in London's West End, Edwards texted the man, who we'll call Alex, to say, quote, "You're getting assaulted in the Ivy. I'm so effing horny, it's indecent," unquote. True to his word, subsequently, in the toilets of the restaurant, Edwards groped Alex claims. Of this incident, Alex reports that, quote, "One of the most shocking things was how brazenly aggressive he was. I think he got off on the fact that he was a powerful figure and that he could get away with grabbing me in the toilets like that," unquote. Alex also tells of Edwards' overwhelming jealousy and possessiveness, reporting that the then BBC anchor threatened to kill anyone who so much as looked at him.
The alleged victim described the encounter as overwhelmingly predatory and said he broke off contact with Edwards shortly afterwards.
In April 2021, during breaks from his live coverage of the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, Edwards tried to get a junior BBC producer, a man, into bed with him. He thought that showing the man a picture, as he did, of his sumptuous hotel suite would make his offer even more appealing. It didn't work, however. The man turned him down.
It started off friendly. I thought it'd be good to be in touch with him and potentially to meet him for career advice, and hoped he might give me some help. He even invited me to his hotel room at Prince Philip's funeral. I thought that was incredibly inappropriate and also against the COVID rules, which I was abiding by.
While on air covering the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in 2018, Edwards was texting people to invite them to engage with him sexually in some way. Edwards was, in fact, known for openly going on dating sites while at work. In In 2023, at some point before his suspension, Edwards sent, quote, suggestive, unquote, messages to a colleague of his relating to the person's appearance. The person says that this made him or her feel uncomfortable. One current BBC employee and one former one both claim to have received, quote, inappropriate, unquote, messages from Edwards, including communications sent late at night. Edwards didn't care what enemies he made at work.
About a year ago, somebody who was his boss and my boss said to me, "Can you tell me why Huw Edwards hates you so much?" And I thought, oh, I thought I was friends with him. So there's something very, very odd. He's not somebody who was liked very much. He was tricky to deal with, and you knew that if you spent time with him, he would slag off at least 10 other people. He was a bully, but he bullied upwards as well. I mean, I've never seen anyone so able to impose themselves on their own managers.
Anchoring BBC News at 10 for 2 whole decades, winning in the process both the trust and the love of the public, and earning nearly £500,000 a year, Edwards, a man of immense professional power and importance, thought he was untouchable. And for years, he actually was.
I think one of the problems that they've had over the years, and certainly it was the case with people like Edwards, that they were allowed to parade around the building as the all-powerful man, and people were too scared to make complaints about him, and some of those that did said they didn't get listened to, and it created this culture that he was invincible. So the fact that he's allowed to behave like that within the BBC is a culture, really, and I'd imagine, you know, that was a similar culture going back to the Jimmy Savile days.
In July 2023, after suspending their highest paid presenter, the BBC reported that Edwards was in line for an internal investigation relating to allegations of, quote, inappropriate behaviour, unquote. Too little, too late, you might say. In the course of his 3-year textual relationship, beginning in 2020, with a 17-year-old who we'll call Simon, Huw Edwards paid the youth approximately £35,000 for explicit photos and video sex.
He sent me a picture of Huw Edwards sat on a sofa in his boxers, leaning forward as though getting ready to fondle himself, while my son performs for him. They would have sex on a video call, and Edwards would pay him for it.
When, after finding out who was funding their son's spiralling drug habit, the boy's parents tried to ask the person's employer to tell the person to cut contact with their son, the employer effectively gave them the brush off. The employer was, of course, none other than the BBC. When I say brush off, on going to his local BBC centre in Wales in May 2023 to complain about Edwards, Simon's stepfather, who we'll call James, was, after being given a number to call to lodge his complaint, ordered away. But James ended up having to Google a number for the BBC, since the one that he'd been given at the BBC office the day before turned out to be false. The £1,000 that Simon received from Edwards a month after this phone call of his stepfather's to the BBC, where his stepfather had ultimately been able to ask someone from the corporation to tell Edwards to leave his son alone once and for all, served as proof that the BBC had done nothing to Edwards, and I'll be offering further evidence of this presently. So did the award that Edwards received in June 2023 for his coverage of the funeral of the late Queen Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, dear friends. Thank you to Trick, and thank you to the people who voted on behalf of a huge team of people back at the BBC. Thank you all very much. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Simon's parents had also got nowhere with South Wales Police when, a month before contacting the BBC, meaning April 2023, they reported Edwards' history of payments to their son for explicit pictures of himself. This means that South Wales Police either found no evidence that Edwards had received explicit pictures of Simon before Simon turned 18, receiving explicit pictures of people aged under 18 being a criminal offence, or just didn't bother investigating the matter. Simon's parents had got nowhere, similarly, in their many attempts to tell Edwards directly to get out of their son's life, bribes and threats being the typical responses that they got from Edwards. At no point, in fact, had Edwards attempted to disguise his identity from either Simon or from Simon's parents. He had no fear of any consequences. In his personal life, just like in his professional life, he considered himself bulletproof, so to speak, especially when it came to the prospect of trouble from either a homeless drug addict, which Simon had sadly since become, or from that person's powerless, pathetic parents.
They look at us, I think they look at us as if we're just lower class. That's it. We're just a lower class, and you know, we're not educated and nothing like that. You don't have to be educated to know the difference between right and wrong. Do you know what I mean?
On the 8th of July 2023, a number of BBC presenters, including Gary Lineker, Jeremy Vine and Nicky Campbell, issued public statements categorically denying that they were the presenter that the BBC had taken off air 2 days before. It was on the 6th of July 2023, you understand, that, having received a tip-off from the Sun newspaper about allegations relating to Edwards' relationship with Simon, the BBC suspended Edwards from all his duties, duly informing their top newsreader of the reasons for this move. For his part, BBC CEO Tim Davie explained that the reason for only making Edwards aware of the allegations relating to Simon at this point lay in BBC protocols. Quote, "You don't take that complaint directly to the presenter unless it has been verified," unquote. Personally, I take this to mean that the BBC doesn't act on allegations against their employees unless the Sun newspaper is about to expose those allegations. Simon's parents took no payment from The Sun for the story of Edwards' interactions with their son, which The Sun published without naming Edwards on the 7th of July 2023. The decision to go to that paper was a last resort since, as shown, they had exhausted all other options. On the 12th of July 2023, Edwards' wife, TV producer Vicky Flint, revealed that Edwards had been hospitalised, having since suffered a nervous breakdown or something. She made this disclosure in the course of her announcement that Edwards was the BBC presenter under suspension. After being triggered by the story in The Sun into investigating Edwards' potential receipt of underage pictures from Simon, the police rapidly found that, while Edwards did have a lengthy history of receiving explicit pictures from Simon, there was no evidence of any criminal liability on Edwards' part. Edwards, who was in hospital anyway, remained suspended for months after the police investigation, while the BBC performed an internal investigation into his professional conduct. When we heard on the 31st of July 2024 that Edwards had pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making indecent images of children, we all thought that this meant that Edwards had, at some point or at varying points, derived physical control over a number of children and performed SCH acts with them while photographing those acts. Someone did do those things to the poor children shown in the 41 images that Edwards obtained, but it wasn't Edwards himself. In law, making a child SCH abuse image includes the acts of acquiring and viewing such images. Acquiring and viewing child SCH abuse images is what Edwards actually did. Not that this isn't deplorable and obscene. His 3 counts of this offence come from the fact that the images come from each of the 3 categories of such images. Category A, depictions of sexual penetration and or torture. Category B, depictions of SCHUAL abuse other than penetration. And Category C, depictions of any abuse that doesn't fall into either Category A or Category C.
The most serious category, of which there were 7 in this, involved some measure of penetrative sex being depicted. There were 12 which was non-penetrative but sexual activity, and the least severe, 22 images of children in erotic poses, naked or partially naked.
It was a strange reaction, actually. I felt sick at the charges. I mean, that day on the Monday when we got them confirmed, I literally couldn't believe it that they were that serious. I'd obviously witnessed the pattern of behaviour and the grooming, and I knew what his modus operandi was, but I didn't know it was that bad. I think what was so shocking.
In March 2024, 25-year-old Alex Williams from Merthyr Tydfil, Wales, was given a 12-month suspended sentence for making and distributing child SCH abuse images. Williams had begun sharing those same images with Huw Edwards in December 2020, some 2 years after first coming on to the then BBC News anchor, which he did via Instagram. Prior to that, he had only been sharing legal explicit images with Edwards, content depicting men aged 18 or over. Offering Edwards legal explicit images was in fact precisely how Williams had come on to Edwards, Edwards having been the only one of the many celebrities to whom Williams had offered such images to have replied to Williams. Williams and Edwards had a 4-year online sexual relationship, meeting in person on but a single occasion. Unlike Edwards though, Williams kept the handsets that he had used to send Edwards the illicit images, which he did between December 2020 and August 2021. It was that handset, as you can see, that nailed Edwards. When, in 2023, police began investigating Williams over allegations of online you-know-whatophilia, they discovered on Williams's phone the WhatsApp trail between Williams and Edwards by which Edwards had received the 41 child SCX abuse images.
This was Edwards after he'd been caught for receiving more than 40 photos and videos of children being abused, sent to him by student Alex Williams. Asked if he wanted to see someone young, Edwards replied, "Go on." The court heard Huw Edwards would send the paedophile hundreds of pounds in cash and gifts as an apparent thank you. Edwards claimed
all the children in the 41 images that Edwards received were boys. At Edwards' sentencing hearing, which took place on the 16th of September 2024 at Westminster Magistrates Court, the judge revealed that, quote, "Whilst most of the children appear to be alone when recorded, I cannot rule out the potential presence of others, and in some of the images, others were clearly seen to be present, and the ages of these individuals are not easily determined," unquote. In line with this, an aggravating factor to Edwards' case was the fact that 2 of the Category A images, one of which being a video, portrayed a boy as young as 7. Given the nature of Category A, it doesn't take much imagining to work out what was being done to the boy and by who. The fact that all the other boys in the images were aged 12 to 15 hardly offers us any comfort. To quote Chief Magistrate Paul Goldspring, the judge, "Sexual abuse over the internet involves forcing or enticing a child or young person to take part in sexual activities, regardless of whether the child is aware of what is happening. A child never does nor can consent. The continued distribution of child abuse images perpetuates a cycle of abuse to fulfill the demand for the sexualization of children. Victims may be aware that their images may be or are still circulating on the internet, and this can lead to feelings of ongoing traumatization. The impact of child sexual abuse imagery may be severe and lifelong. Children may feel guilt, shame and self-blame and be vulnerable to further sexual abuse," unquote. In his mitigation, Edwards said that, on engaging with social media from the year 2018 onwards, he himself became a victim of online grooming, that his dad was basically a bully, that, having failed to get into Oxford and having gone to Cardiff University instead, he always felt like an outsider at the BBC, that he's a long-standing alcoholic, that he and his wife stopped having sex years and years before they split up, and that, owing to his proven long-running mental health problems, half the time he didn't even know what he was doing. It looks like serving as anchor of BBC News at 10 for 20 years was something that, very luckily, fell into the 50% of Edwards' time where Edwards was aware of the actions that he was undertaking. The actual word-for-word sentencing remarks from the judge are linked in the description box below. You might find, if you listen to them, that I distorted somewhat some of the mitigating factors that I just mentioned. Edwards' wife, Vicky Flynn, to remind you, dumped Edwards at some point before the 30th of July 2024. This was the date on which her separation from her husband was publicised. I can't tell you anything, however, about Edwards' current relationship with his 3 sons and his 2 daughters. Since the man who supplied Edwards with the 41 child SCX abuse images got off with a suspended sentence, it was a foregone conclusion that Edwards too would be spared a custodial prison sentence. On this point, Daniel Fogson, BAFTA-winning actor, 21 years of age, who downloaded and viewed over 850 child SCX abuse photos and videos, an 8-month suspended sentence. 165 of the photos and videos in question most probably showed adults ping a child and or torturing a child. Secondary school teacher from Plymouth, Joshua Pope, 26 years of age, who downloaded and viewed hundreds and hundreds of child SCX abuse photos and videos, including no fewer than 276 Category A images, an 8-month suspended sentence. Eminent NHS consultant, father of 4, coach to a girls' rugby team, Mansur Khan, aged 54, downloaded and viewed over 100 photos and videos of child SCX abuse, some portraying children aged as young as 2, an 8-month suspended sentence. A former town mayor from Pembroke Dock in Wales, Terry Judkins, 55 years old, a 12-month suspended sentence for making and distributing child SCX abuse images. Edwards got a 6-month suspended sentence, a requirement to register as a sex offender for the next 7 years, and a requirement to undergo a sex offender rehabilitation programme. What he didn't get, though, was an SHPO, a sexual harm prevention order. This order would have enabled the monitoring of Edwards' internet use. Judge Goldspring, though, said that he didn't deem any such order necessary since, quote, "I am satisfied on the balance of the evidence evidence before me that an SHPO is not required in order to minimise the risk of harm to the public or to any particular members of the public, and is not proportionate in the circumstances given the protective impact of the sentence and his continued assistance by mental health services," unquote. People get prison time for crimes that everyone considers far less serious than online you-know-whatophilia. There are people inside, for instance, for not paying their council tax and for making social media posts which, during the summer riots of 2024, were deemed in court to amount to incitement to violence or incitement to racial hatred, but which in reality led to nothing. That said, we should understand that in passing sentence for convictions of online child SEX abuse, judges are constrained by the sentencing guidelines. I understand that the prospect of mandatory prison sentences for offences involving Category A images at least is set to be considered by Parliament. While we hope that this becomes law, we can't understand why it isn't already law that a conviction for distributing, accessing and viewing child SEX abuse images, whether Category A, Category B or Category C, will automatically attract a lengthy custodial sentence. In line with this, we want Parliament to pass an act mandating lengthy custodial sentences for all forms of online child SEX abuse that covers all three image categories. Knowing shortly after Edwards' arrest in November 2023 the reasons for the arrest, the BBC only stopped paying Edwards his salary of over £450,000 a year in April 2024. This was when, on account of his ongoing mental health struggles, Edwards resigned. Edwards' suspension pay came to the amount of £200,000, which was funded, of course, from public money, TV licence fees. Why did the BBC pay out this public money to Edwards so willingly? Given that their employees are contractually bound not to act in any way that will bring the corporation into disrepute, were the BBC bosses not legally entitled to ask Edwards if the allegations were true and then sack him on the spot if he had said yes? If yes, why didn't they do so? Alternatively, did they not have the legal entitlement to give Edwards notice at the time of his arrest that if he were to be convicted of the offences for which he had been arrested, he would be required to return the entire sum of his suspension pay? If so, why didn't they give him that notice? If the BBC had asked Edwards if he was guilty, Edwards could have refused to answer on grounds that he was legally entitled to await the outcome of his arrest before offering an answer, innocent until proven guilty. As I say though, the BBC could have responded with the notice that I've mentioned and with a threat to sue Edwards for bringing the corporation into disrepute if he were, as a result of his prosecution, if any, to be found guilty. In any event, knowing that he was guilty, Edwards had the freedom, though not a legal obligation, to keep his silence but resign straight away. We all know what choice he made, however, and as at the 23rd of September 2024, Edwards has told the BBC to stick their demand for the return of his £200,000 suspension pay. It's also very unlikely that the BBC will be able, legally, to deny Edwards his £300,000 a year pension. While we might hope that the Huw Edwards scandal stands as a watershed moment for the BBC, an event that finally triggers the collapse of the safe space that the BBC seems to offer for child SEX abusers, we should stop dreaming, basically. It isn't a question of if we will discover another high-profile child SEX offender at the bosom of the BBC. It is, without a doubt, a question of when. That's my own view, at least.
Look, the Edwards scandal is the latest in a long line of paedophile sagas dating back decades to have marred the BBC's reputation. Jimmy Savile, Jonathan King, Stuart Hall, Chris Denning, Rolf Harris, and now, again tonight, Huw Edwards. Has the BBC got a problem? Let's get the thoughts.
In February 2024, the BBC apologised to Simon's parents over their handling of their complaint against Edwards. Too little, too late. Huw Edwards might be down, but he's not out. If you were looking for someone to coach others in the areas of interview preparation, public speaking and political consulting, and if you are doing so on behalf of a charity or some other not-for-profit organisation, the services of the fallen BBC star are yours for the taking, completely free of masturbation to videos of little boys being raped. I mean, completely free of charge. Edwards has apparently posted one such advert on LinkedIn. I'm not sure what miracle he's counting on to get the whole nation to forget his criminal offences. If this video has been worth your while, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.